In this presentation, we've looked at the broad structure of health and safety legislation and how it applies in practice. We've also considered some of the key principles that underpin the operation of that legislation. In later presentations, we're going to look at how legislation applies to specific duty holders. In particular, we're going to consider how it impacts on you as an employee, or as a supervisor, or as a manager. There are also some presentations that are going to look at other key legal concepts that impact on health and safety legislation, such as reasonably practicable or due diligence. But in terms of what to take away, you need to understand that different jurisdictions across Australia have different health and safety legislation. And whilst there may be some technical variations from state to state and legislation to legislation, the broad principles that underpin that legislation are largely the same. As an individual, you need to understand that health and safety legislation creates individual obligations for you. In order to discharge those obligations, you need to understand what they are. And the best starting point to understand what your obligations are is your organisation's safety management system. That includes the training you've received and the policies and procedures that apply to the work that you do. Complying with those policies and procedures and following the training is one of the best ways that you can meet your obligations. The important thing to understand about health and safety legislation, and again, to reiterate the point, it creates obligations that apply specifically to you. It doesn't really matter what anybody else does. The question that gets asked is, what did you do to meet your health and safety obligations? It's also important to understand that you have a liability to meet those obligations regardless of whether or not your conduct causes an accident. It's important to understand as an individual working at a workplace in Australia that it's not enough just to be safe. It's not enough just to do the right thing. Health and safety legislation creates specific obligations. You need to understand those obligations and you need to understand what you need to do to discharge them. These are important concepts and they impact on your personal liability. And these are important themes that we're going to be looking at in the next series of presentations.